Hey guys, you've seen the thumbnail and you know what this one's about. This is the Arma Fireteam, and since we're not an influencer channel, we had to wait for this to come out to the public like everyone else. And we're really excited about this one, aren't we, Robert?
Yes, we are.
Come out from behind the cameras, dude. Join me for this. He's been expecting this one for a while and he's really excited about it, and I understand how that goes. In this video, we're gonna get this out of the box and we're gonna make that kind of a quick deal. We're gonna go over the car, we're gonna take a little time on that one, then we're gonna take it out and run it as it comes out of the box to see what it's capable of. Then we'll bring you back inside, we'll ask our 4 questions.
Is it fun?
Yeah, is it fun?
Is it durable?
Is it durable?
Where does it rate?
Oh, is it worth the money?
Is it worth the money?
And then where does it rate in the collection? This is gonna be a lot of fun, guys. Check this out. All right, let's get this thing out of the box. Beautiful. That is cool. And we got the white one.
Suction in that one.
That was long-winded. It was. Wow. Okay. Got that box. Ooh, look at that. Okay, ready? That's cool. What do you think of that?
That's bad.
That is cool. I really do like it. Look how soft and look how pliable those runners are on the side. Those will take pretty good impact, I think. All right, before we go any further, you know what we got to do here? We're going to go ahead and get this plastic off, but today, Robert gets it. Go for it, dude.
Believe it or not, I've never pulled plastic off an RC before. I bought 2 brand new ones and they came without plastic, so this is cool.
Is that satisfying or what?
That is very satisfying.
Awesome. Okay, but before we get into the car, we need to see what comes in the box. And the packet. Okay, so this is what comes with the car. We have a radio and our usual packet. Now, the radio here is the SLT3. I'm not a fan of this radio. I don't like the way it feels in my hand. It just seems like kind of a cheap radio. And a lot of guys talk good about this one. I'm not one of those guys. as far as that goes, guys, this is just as basic a radio as you can get. It does have some rudimentary controls, but that's about as far as that goes. In the packet here, we've got our usual complement. Let's go ahead and open this up and see what actually comes inside. Now, Arma started doing this. I noticed this right away. Arma started doing this. It comes with shims for the differentials now, and this is something they've discovered they need to do. And the reason they need to do those shims is because the casings that those are shipped with for the differentials are all just a little bit different. We've mic'd them. They're not all the same. So instead of taking the time at the factory, now they're sending these out so that you can shim your diffs properly and you have less chance of actually rupturing one. Along with that, we get a rudimentary tool kit, and this has a wheel wrench, shock wrench, and some basic Allens in there. You also get some new pistons for the shock absorbers. And these are nice if you're trying to tune your ride to work in a specific direction. This also comes with a speed gear, which should allow you to get this up to a pretty good speed. It comes with a sticker kit, but the most important thing that comes with it is this, the manual. This will help you get things set up and ready to go. It covers everything you need to know about the car, but what's really cool is this little guy. And this is the explode for all of the important things. The differentials and whatnot are in this little thin one, so don't lose this one. And then of course, you've got your basic warranty information there, and that's what comes in the kit. Okay, before we get the top off of this thing, take a look at the styling. It looks a lot like a side-by-side, which is pretty much what it's patterned after, and it's a really cool design. It kind of looks like a Polaris, but it's got some of the Can-Am look to it. It's really neat in design. The paint scheme is outstanding. It appears to be external in places. It's got kind of a matte finish to it. It's not real shiny. That's pretty good. The bumpers look pretty substantial from the outside. The tires, these look like a cross between the Outcast tires and the Italian tires. And there's a reason for that, and I'll tell you what that is here right quick, but these are really impressive. They've got the size of the Outcast, but they're kind of shaped like the Italian ones. And the Italian ones give you a lot of speed. I'm not sure how well these will grow up and how they'll hold up, but we'll find out that a little bit later. So first off, let's have a look at this body. And this thing is pretty cool. The people inside of it, you know, the arms moving, everything. It's got a lot of detail in there. I can see a lot of camera options when you go to run this thing. But inside, if you take a look inside of this thing, it's got a hard shell case in there, and it's basically just a frame that runs throughout the whole thing, which makes it really rigid. It's a real strong situation in there. All these are panels that are screwed down onto it so you can replace panels if needs be. It's just kind of a neat body. I'm not sure at this point whether I'm going to be a fan of this or not. What do you think, Robert? Do you like this?
I do. I really like the body. I'm like you. It feels hard and everything. Just not sure what kind of damages could take without having to replace panels.
Yeah, and if you take a look inside and take a look down inside here, the way it hooks on front and back, it hooks on to the shock towers. And I see an issue there. And let's get up close with that for a second here. They connect over this, and it hooks on here, and that's the front piece. In the back, it connects on this one and hooks onto these two. It also latches into the bumpers, front and rear, and there's saddles for everything. So it locks in real nice, and there's 4 pins here. And these 4 pins allow the body to center when you put it on. And in a brand new kit, that's a beautiful thing. It goes right on, it lines things up really good, and it sits right where you want it to. Bash it for a while, and I mean bash it for real, and you start bending things a little bit, and I'm worried about whether or not it will still line up with these once you tweak it a little bit. You know, it doesn't have a super hard chassis, it's got a stamped chassis. It doesn't appear to have the super hard shock towers, although these are pretty solid. If you take a look up here, there's not a lot of venting in that, so it's got a lot more mass to it. But that doesn't really matter when you bend these things. If you land on the front here and bend it back a little, all of a sudden the body doesn't fit. And that's something I'm real concerned about, so I will definitely keep an eye on that. What do you think? Does that sound like a viable problem?
It really does. I'm just wondering if the rigidity of the body incorporated with all these points you're talking about where it hooks up, if that's actually going to combine to help with bending and breakage.
Yeah, I agree.
Or if it's all going to go at one time.
Yeah, we'll only be able to tell that after some runtime. Also, I really think it could have a bigger bumper on the front, but it does suit the design real well, but it doesn't offer as much protection for the arms as you could get. The rear one, I think it stands clear up before it touches. I really think that it could use a wheelie bar of sorts on here, and I may swap that out later.
Yep.
But depends on how much these rings and this support the body overall. If you need this to support the tail of the body, that option may not be there. Hard to say for real. What it does have inside, which is really cool here, it does have the 2050 motor, it does have the 150 amp Spectrum speed control, it does have the SLT3 receiver in there, and it's got a standard servo up front. So it's basic running gear, but there's one thing that's added that's different. Right here, it's got the handbrake, which locks the rear end up. Now that for me is kind of neat, I suppose. It's more of a curiosity. I understand why they use it in the infraction, because that's a drifting car. So you want to lock the rear ends to get it to drift. In this situation, you're going to wind up locking this down to get the rear end to skid. But in my experience, you can do that by braking and powering into it and getting the same action. The problem is when you lock up the rear end, and I haven't proven this yet, this is just my opinion, but if you lock up the rear end, it throws a lot of extra undue pressure on the center differential. Now, we looked into this, and this came with 10,000 in the front, 10,000 in the rear, and 200,000 in the center differential. And it's not locking it down per se, but it's still fairly stiff, which should help with ballooning. But when you lock this down, it has to fight that resistance here. And it does say in the manual, when you're using the handbrake, don't be on the throttle, because the center differential straight up will not handle that. So I'm not sure if that's going to stay in this car for me. I'm not sure if I'm a fan of that. I would like to transfer this straight into my Felony and use it for drifting with that. I think it would work really good there. But today we're going to go ahead and test it as it came out of the box. Other than that, the suspensions look the same. It's got the same type of sway bar assemblies in it. The battery box is the same. It does have the larger radio box, so you can put a 6-channel in. If you want to do that, you can do that too. Everything else looks pretty much the same as most of their other platforms. So I'll be really curious to see how it handles. That only leaves one thing left to do, guys. Let's take it out and test it. Check this out. So there you go, guys. That's the running footage for the Arma Fireteam. And you know, it was an interesting car to drive. And just so you're aware, Rob, come on out. Rob's here. He's back doing what he normally does for the channel. So he's still around, and this is how it goes. But we're going to run with our normal format. Thanks, brother.
Yep.
All right, so in this one, we're gonna go ahead and take this down and go over what we've discovered with the car. We're gonna give you our rating at the end and all that good stuff, so let's get started. All right, so let's get right down into it with this thing, and let's start off with the body and the body mount system. Now, this is a hard chassis like we discussed earlier, and it's got the frame and cage in there, which makes it a pretty rigid system. It doesn't want to move much, it doesn't bend much, but it's not strong enough to actually be structural. You can bend it. So, and the problem with that is this has many fixed points here. So this mounts to the chassis at the front bumper. This right here mounts to the shock tower. This little hole right here, that's your front brace, and that's what comes up through. You put your clip on that. There are 4 holes. There's 4 holes here that those pins go through to hold it in line. There's another one here that goes on the rear shock tower. This hooks to the rear bumper, and you've got 2 holes here. That's where your rear pins go, and that's all that's necessary to get this thing hooked down. The problem being, when it's brand new, that stuff hooks on pretty nicely. It goes right in, everything's lined up the way it should be, and it works the way it should. But once you bash this a little bit and you taco a part or two, you bend a shock tower, you know, take an impact that shouldn't be, you bend the chassis just a bit, this no longer fits because some of those components move, they no longer line up, and it's a problem. That being said, it's not really a killer for the car, but it is really inconvenient, and if you're kind of new to the sport, it can be super frustrating. Now, what we wound up doing here is on these back posts, and this is what they are. It's kind of a little crucifix looking thing here, and I'll show you a picture of this. This is the T that, there's 2 of these, and they sit right back here. And what they do is that body sits on top of them, but it is such a close tolerance that it's really hard to get that pin through at the top, especially if you get separation between the plastic component and the framework. It takes up too much space and you can't get the pins in. And it has been known to bend those clips so that they are really hard to get in anyway. So with this situation, this little guy right here, we wound up planing 1/8 of an inch off the top of each one, and we used our multi-tool and we just shaved the top so we could actually sit down on it enough to get the pins in. That saved a lot. But beside that, we also had to raise the rear pins 1 hole. So in order to do that, you have to actually take these off, raise them up 1 hole, because the way they're designed, you can't get at them with a tool unless you remove them from the car. Raise it up 1 hole. It still sits pretty good. It still kind of lines up, but it doesn't necessarily sit down as tight as it does the other way, which allows it to float on those a little bit more. And it did make it a lot easier to get the body on and off, even with a small bend in the chassis. And this did bend the chassis, so it didn't bend it a lot, but it did bend it some, and that's what we've come to expect from Arma on these RTR vehicles. They generally have a stamped chassis, they have stamped shock towers, and they have plastic chassis braces, which when you're trying to really have a good time and you come down on the nose or on the tail, it does bend the chassis because the plastic braces don't hold up. The stamped chassis is that light, thin aluminum, and it has no strength to it, and the shock towers are the same. It doesn't take much to bend one. Even though it appears to be inside the body, we bent them pretty good. And that being said, before you say that we're unduly hard on our vehicles, keep in mind we're testing these in a brutal fashion so you know exactly what they can hold up to. And that's why we do what we do. We do know what we're doing here, and we know how to handle these cars, but at the same time, we want to see what the average user would put these through and whether or not it would hold up. And this morning I sat down with some friends, we talked about the car. What would they do in a situation where they went out to a nice dirt field or what have you and had some piles and some debris to run through? The question was, would you launch it off of that? Would you run it off of that? Would you run off this? Would you run over that? And every single one of them said yes, they would run them the way we're running them. So this isn't actually out of pocket. This is what the average user from our group would do with this car. With that behind us, let's go ahead and set the body out of the way now and get into the car and see what we actually had issues with, what held up, and what we think of it overall. Let's begin with what broke on the car. Now, As far as broke goes, that's substantial because, or that's subjective because bent, in our opinion, is still broken. So if it's bent, you have to modify it to get it to work again. That's broken in our opinion, but we actually broke a couple of things that needed replacing, and one of them is this. And this is the front chassis brace, and this thing is plastic, and right at the front here where it hooks to that top plate, it just sheared it right off at the bolt, and it's just floating in there now. It's junk. It broke right away, and we have this failing a lot. I had several of these laying around because we've upgraded cars, but this is where it shattered. And if you take a look at this right here, you'll see, notice how it's alongside the bolt right here. That's where it's broken, and it sheared it clean off. That's only one item. As well, we went ahead and we noticed that the steering servo, although it's a high torque servo and it was really quick, the tires were really fast, everything seemed to be working good, under normal conditions, without actually blasting it in anything, it just burned the motor up in it, and we weren't doing anything out of pocket. We were just driving in the gravel, doing what the average user would do, and it literally baked this one. And this is the one that was in it, and it cooked it. We took it apart and had a look at it, and the motor inside of it is fried, and there's no way you could do that unless you hold it to one side, or if you have a gyro turned way up. This didn't have a gyro in it, and it overworked the motor, but this didn't have any of that going on. We weren't maxed on our steering all the time. We weren't doing anything like that, and it baked this. So right out of the box, this got 2 batteries, and it was toast. So the rest of the running gear held up pretty good. I really give props to the arms. The arms are really good on this car. We really tested those good. It was severely cold weather outside. We were in the low 30s when we were running it. And the front arms, this is the first time on one of these style platforms that I've noticed that the front arms held up perfectly. They've got some scarring on them, but there was absolutely no failure in the arms. The shock ends, those held up really good. The outdrive units that are on it, those held up really well. There was no failure in that portion of the vehicle at all. But on the broken side, even though it's inside of the body, and what I mean by that is, if you take a look at how this mounts the car, the shock towers clear up inside the tail here, and somehow that still got bent. And we wound up using a crescent wrench to tune that back out to somewhat close to square, and that allowed us to get the body back on it. But this side here was waffled way in. Take a look at the other side. That one's bent the other way just a little bit. The front one held up all right. But when we flipped it over and threw a straight edge on it, and take a look at this, the chassis is bent. Beyond the chassis problem though, we've discovered that this has basically the stock running gear for all of the 6S platform with the 2050 based motor. It's got 150 amp speed control in it, and these worked admirably. Just like the rest of them, it held up good, and in the video you'll notice that we did run it against a Creighton, and that one had the stock running gear and stock gearing as well. And it was a toss-up as to who came out on top with that one, because this has the same basic speed quotient as the Creighton, although it's not quite as wide. It did handle pretty well, but the radio gear is a lot more than just the motor and that type of thing. It came with this, and this is the SLT3, and we did run it with this for the whole thing. And the thing is, for me, and this is a personal preference, guys, this doesn't fit my hand all that well, so it's awkward for me. And when we changed out the servo in it, because we did cook the servo, we couldn't set our endpoints on it so it would turn farther one way than the other. It became a pretty good hassle, so we eliminated this and we put this one on it. Now this is one of my favorites. This is the DX5C, and we have the rugged too, but I just like the C better. It seems to handle better, it fits good in the hand, and once we got everything synced up, and it was a snap to do, didn't take long, but once we got everything synced up, I was able to get into the programming and set the endpoints. Now it turns equally both left and right, and I also assigned the brake to this button, and it's intermittent. So it only hits the brake when you touch the button, then it releases it and it lets the brake off. But you can also set it in here to turn it on like a switch, and it'll hold the brake. I wouldn't recommend that, it'd be hard on the servo, but setting it to intermittent was a snap. And all of the settings went real easy on this. The radio that came with it synced right to this with no problems. That being said, guys, I'm not really trying to trash on this car as far as the 6S platform goes. This fits right in with the group. It's an amazing vehicle. It handles good. But one thing I really want to talk about, one of their great advantages, what they really did that I think sets this ahead of the other cars, is the tires. And they did a great job on the tires. We checked them. They're the same circumference as the Creighton tires and the Outcast tires. They're the same diameter, so they have the same drive, but they're designed differently. These don't seem to swell as much. They have a much higher sidewall, which allows it to shift and go over debris as opposed to hooking a wheel and flipping the car. So it does handle that a lot better. I'm a big fan of the extra sidewall, and it's built a little narrower and it's squared up, more like Italian tire, but the Italians have a real small sidewall. The big sidewall makes a giant difference. I want to take a second and talk about something else though. A lot of people have said that this thing is a mix between the Mojave and the Creighton, and that's kind of yes, but kind of no, and there's a reason that I say that. Now, it does have the Creighton arms, but surprisingly, so does the Italian. And if you take a look at this right here, this is Italian outdrive unit, and if you take a look at these two, this is Italian, and if you can see that, that's kind of a flat surface here. This one is a Creighton, and see the difference in elevation? The Creighton sticks out at least 1/4 of an inch farther than Italian, so this could be a wider car, but they chose to make it narrow to fit the body style. But this has got more in common with Italian than it does the Creighton. The Creighton is a wider platform. This is narrowed up some, but like I say, it does have the Creighton arms on it, and these do look to me, I didn't check the part numbers, but these do look to me like Creighton shocks and Creighton style shock towers off of the version 5. So it is a nice mix of all three, Mojave, Italian, and Creighton. All right, with that behind us, what we're looking at now is 4 questions. And if you watch the channel, you know what they are. Question 1, is it fun? Question 2, is it durable? Question 3, is it worth the money? And question 4, where does it stack up in our collection? So let's get on with it. Question 1, is this thing fun? Well, you know, for what it is pretty fun. You know, most of the 6S platform cars are a blast to play with, and this is no exception when it comes to that. However, this does have a couple of weird things that go on with it. Like, for example, off the ramp, this has a tendency to nosedive. And I watched a couple of other channels when this first got announced, when the influencers got to come out, and one of them moved the battery to the back to offset it so that it would jump better. I haven't done this. We run things as they come out of the box, and the way it is out of the box, it has a tendency to nosedive. And when you're up in the air and you can't, even at full throttle, get the nose up, you got to brake to try and get that front end over. And they do crash pretty good when they do that, and that's inherent to this one. When we were out running it against the Creighton flies beautifully over the ramps, and it's in a stock form as well with a couple of durability upgrades only. And it doesn't do that hardly at all. It flies beautiful, it lands good. The Typhons, the Italians, the Creightons, they all jump better than this does. But with that slight modification of moving the weight towards the rear, that might solve the problem. And this doesn't have a wing to help with wind resistance when you're up in the air to keep the tail down. So that might be a bit of a thing. As far as the car itself goes, is this thing fun? Well, yeah, most of the 6S platforms are fun. But for what you pay for this, for what you get, I'm only going to give this one 7 out of 10 for fun. And question 2, durability. How tough is this thing really? Well, when you look at the actual 8th scale or 6S platform cars from Arma, if you're in the RTR category, they all come about the same. They have the stamped chassis, they have the light duty shock towers on them, and they have plastic chassis braces right out of the box, and that just leads to failure if you're going to really push these things, which that's what they're designed for. But still, I understand why they do it. When you really think about it, if they put all the hardened components in this to start with, it would be so expensive, no one would want to buy one. You know, I would rather get something like this and upgrade things as they fail, as opposed to spending $1,200 on a 7th scale rig that really shouldn't cost that much. So part of it is they're trying to keep the cost down, but the other part of it is, and this is the part that really stings, They make money on parts, guys. I mean, they just do. When the chassis fails, you need a new chassis. When the center braces break, you buy new center braces, and that is part of the bottom line for the company. It is a business model. So if you sell a car that never breaks, you get paid once. But if you sell one that they have to buy parts for once in a while, you get paid repeatedly, and it keeps the company in business. So there's that. You got to decide whether or not that balance is worth it. As far as durability goes, we broke quite a few things and bent quite a few things in this car, and we only ran 3 batteries through it total. And that's enough for our test. We ran it in some pretty rough conditions, and we broke quite a few things. So we're going to give this one 6 out of 10 for durability. And question number 3, is the Arma Fireteam worth the money? Well, that's always subjective. You know, we got just under $800 in this kit, and that's the standard going price. We pay the same thing everyone else does. And it's basically just a mix of all of their best cars. And that's pretty cool in its own right. But when you start adding top weight, and that's the thing, this body weighs a lot more, it sits a lot higher, the car itself sits higher, so it's got a pretty high center of gravity, which means when you get into some real high traction situations, this may have the tendency to roll over a bit more than the other ones. And since you have basically the Mojave chassis with the Creighton arms and the Italian outdrive units on it, it's a nice mix of everything. It's nice and long. It's not as wide as it could be, but the real saving grace for this car are the tires. I'm really impressed with those. I'm really considering putting those on some of the other ones, but at the same time, if you have any of the other ones, you're going to have about the same experience. Now, what really counts here is if this body style works for you, and I know some pretty good military guys that really dig the look of this because that's kind of their thing. If that speaks to you, this is definitely worth the money because still, it's a high performance car. It works good. You can get parts for it, and it is pretty cool looking. But if you're looking for a basher, something you can go out and just tear into stuff with, this body becomes a bit of a liability. And of course, this is all our opinion here. So as far as, is this worth the money? Well, if you have the money and you have a place to run this car and you aren't afraid to wrench on it when you start bending things, I'd say, yeah, it's worth the money in those situations. But if you're out to just bash full on, I would recommend a different one and just swap out the tires. So for this, as far as the value goes, is it worth the money? I'm going to give this one 6 out of 10 for value, guys, because you could get a lot more and it could do a lot more than what you pay for. And question number 4, where does this land in our collection? Well, that's a good question because I really do enjoy the Arma cars. I like Traxxas, I like Arma, I like Losi. You know, it doesn't really matter who makes the car. I rate all of these by the car, not the manufacturer. And knowing this is a 6S car from Arma, I expect a certain amount of thrill out of it, and this one does deliver. It does give you a lot of excitement. It just doesn't fly all that well, in my opinion. It's going to take some serious modification to get it to do so. And the thing is, I have other Armas that fly just fine, and if you really think about it, this is kind of an XL Italian in the first place. With the longer chassis, it's got the same width, dimensions. You could make something similar to this that would fly like crazy with the Italian design and still use these tires to get around. That might be something we'll do later in the channel. But as far as what came out of the box, guys, I'm going to put this one in 8th place, just ahead of the UDR in 9th. The Arma Fireteam, holding down place number 8 in our collection. Hey guys, if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. It's awesome when you do. And don't forget that notification bell to stay informed of upcoming videos. You know, here at the channel, we love getting our hands on the new tech and sharing what we learned with you. If you have an Arma Fireteam and you've suffered other things with the car, please feel free to leave it in the comments down below and help others along the way. Hey guys, for Rob, I'm AJ with AJ Jam Studios saying, keep bashing, guys.